So first question, Alex, how did you get started in mixed martial arts?
Man, I must have been like 16 years old in high school. And right around like 2005, 2006, there was kind of like a big Texas Hold'em poker craze. So in high school, a few friends and I would get together and play some cards on the weekends. And, every Saturday, every once in a while, there'd be like a pride fight or a UFC fight. And it was actually like my dad and then one of my friends' dads were really into watching MMA. So occasionally on these poker nights, we would sit down and watch some UFC or some pride fights and even like bet on the fights sometimes, not really knowing what we were doing just for fun. And that kind of piqued some interest. And then one of my really good friends, Eddie, his dad was a professional boxer back in the 80s. He was actually one of Mike Tyson's sparring partners, in Houston back in the day. So my very close friend was into some like amateur boxing. And one of my other friends had started doing jujitsu. We started watching more fights. And then one year for Christmas, my parents were like, do you want anything? And I was like, nah, if you see maybe like a boxing gym, I'd like to get a membership there. And sure enough, thankfully the boxing gym that I went to, they had a jujitsu program, and it was an LA boxing gym. So they had some fighters, but it was more like an exercise style gym. But this was kind of like luck of the draw. Thankfully, the instructor, there was a guy named Antonio Flores, and he was like an actual fighter. He had some MMA fights. So he kind of like took me under his wing and kind of showed me the ways. And I just really piqued my interest, and everything just kind of like built up more and more and more from there. And I remember my first time ever training, I must have been 16-year-old. It was in January in 2000, I think 7, on a Saturday. Did the class, loved the class, and have trained pretty much every day since.
Brilliant. And you've been in the UFC, I think, is it since 2015 now? 2015 or 2016?
So it was January 2nd of 2016 was my first fight. So come January, I'll be 5 years in.
5 years. And most recently, you had your fight against Rhys Mckee, winner by unanimous decision. Tell me a little bit about the game plan for that fight and how you feel like you executed it.
Yeah, I fancy myself a kickboxer. When I was an amateur, I would cross train. I would talk to some other guys, and most people were pretty intimidated by the striking aspect in the 4-ounce gloves in MMA. Myself included. I think anyone is afraid as a youngster fighting in the cage. But getting knocked out kind of like the worst possible thing. So I tried to make like everyone's fear my strength. Not that everyone is afraid of it, but like that was the aspect most people either neglected or weren't very good at because it was the hardest thing to do. So I really tried to become as comfortable a striker in MMA as possible. And I always made the joke, I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu so I could keep the fight standing up. So like if people did try to wrestle, I would be formidable on the ground. And now I suppose I have a bit of a hybrid style, but my game plan against Rhys Mckee was to out kickbox him. And if that was going south, to potentially grapple with him, but I never really needed to call that audible. Going into the 3rd round, my coach was like, Morono, Rhys is in good shape and he's got a great chin. He's like, you're probably not going to knock him out. So he was like, keep a technical focus on your volume. And if you see a takedown, look for a takedown. And I was like, all right, coach. And sure enough, everything kind of worked out in that 3rd round. And I'll tell you, I really expected to get a finish in that fight, but Rhys was tough and in good shape. I knew he was tough coming into that fight, but he was tougher than I envisioned. I've hit guys with less shots that have put him down. And I hit Rhys with some big shots, and he didn't even flinch. So I kind of knew what I was in for. In hindsight now, getting such a quick turnaround fight against such a veteran, I think it's really beneficial having that 15 minutes inside the octagon. So I can really try to get as much experience, staying sharp and working on good decision-making and pacing, coming up in this fight next week.
And that was one of the things I wanted to mention, actually. So your last fight, Rhys Mckee, was the 12th of November. And we've now got the fight booked against Anthony Pettis on the 19th of December. So a 35-day turnaround. How did this fight come about? Because it seems to have kind of materialized out of nowhere. Was this something that was already talked about? How did this come about?
No, the consensus I'm getting online is like, this is such a random matchup. And it's funny, after talking to some of the media guys and even hearing what the fans are saying, they're like, you know what? The more we think about this fight, it's actually a fun fight, which I'm happy. I'm happy the guys are excited, but it was equally as surprising to me. Like picking up a short notice fight is always kind of surprising. It's one thing if somebody, falls out and I'm a replacement, because I actually very actively study all the cards. It's funny, there's like a little bit of a bright light on my face. And I have Tapology up on my PC. So I'm always looking at fight cards and I'm like, these are all the welterweight fights on this fight card. I would take any of these fights. And you know, maybe like 1 week after my fight against Rhys, I was at home looking at the fight card. You know, I had a few teammates on the card: Matt Schnell,
Yep.
Ryan Spann, and Jeff Neal. You know, Schnell and Spann's fights got rebooked and rescheduled, but Jeff's still on there. I was like, man, that would be such a cool card to get on. And like, teammates aside, it's such a highly touted dynamite fight card to finish out the year. But I was like, there's no way. You know, there's no way I'd pick up a fight. You know, I know Bilal Muhammad and Diego Lima and Chaos and Michelle Pierre are on that card. So it's like, there are some welterweights. And then my teammate, Jeff Neal, naturally, like I of course wouldn't want his fight to drop off. So that welterweight fight didn't count, but there were a couple more. But I was like, nah, that's wishful thinking. But turns out when the main event and Hamzat and Edwards dropped, they had bumped Wonderboy and Jeff up. So they needed another high profile fight to fight. And then, like, from what I heard, Anthony Pettis was in Vegas and let the UFC know that he was looking to fight. And then the conversation I got from my coach was the UFC asked for me specifically by name if I'd fight Pettis. And like, one, I was honored. And two, I was immediate to jump at that opportunity. And as soon as I got signed to the UFC, after my fights, I would take, you know, a necessary break for like a mental and physical kind of relaxation. But as soon as I was physically able, I would get right back to training regularly and eating clean and healthy as a professional athlete should.
Yeah.
So sure enough, you know, 2 weeks after my Rhys Mckee fight, the week after Thanksgiving, Monday hits. I'm like, cool, I'm back on my clean eating regimen. And I'm back on like training for 2 days, getting strength and conditioning back in the mix. And thankfully on Tuesday, I caught word of the fight. So I was already kind of in the process of training more thoroughly. You know, my weight had already dropped a fair amount because I got back to training, you know, pretty consistently. So, you know, it's going to be a very average weight cut. And I have such a strong base of cardio and being in shape because I'm coming off this Rhys Mckee fight with no injuries. So, man, it really was a perfect storm to capitalize on such a strong opportunity.
Yeah. And as we know, Anthony Pettis is a massive name in the sport. You know, he was the what was it? He was that first UFC fighter on the Wheaties box and all of that. He does have a history. What is your opinion of this current Anthony Pettis that you'll be fighting next Saturday?
Man, you know, Anthony Pettis is Anthony Pettis. You know, I know he's not been able to string together a lot of wins, but here I'm going to pull up his record. But man,
doing me research for these interviews.
yeah. I mean, I'm a dude. I'm an MMA fan through and through. But you know, if you oh wow, they rebooked. Okay, cool. I'm still opening the main card. Cool. They rebooked the title. But like, man, if you just, and I went through an interview the other day. If you look at his wins and his losses are all super impressive, and his losses are just super impressive guys. And he doesn't get finished that much. I mean, he got finished against Holloway and Poirier and Ferguson and CDF, but those dudes are all bangers. Like, especially Ferguson. Like, no one wants to fight T-Ferg. T-Ferg's the man. You know, I don't think the end of his career, like the latter part of his career, is anything to be ashamed about. These guys are all top 10 lightweights and welterweights. They're all very respected fighters. And I'm expecting the most dangerous Anthony Pettis that has ever been. One thing I did as an amateur and as an early pro is I would always overhype my opponents. So when I would see them at weigh-ins, they weren't as big and scary as I thought. And then, like, in the fight, if the fight is difficult, I'm like, cool, this is what I expected. Let's make good decisions and win. Whereas I know some guys, as like a defensive method, kind of like undersell their opponents. Like, oh, this guy sucks. This guy's old. This guy's losing. And then, like, in the fight, if you're not like dominating them, you're like, oh no, this fight's harder than I thought. And that causes weaker minded guys to break. So I would always, you know, hope for the best, but certainly prepare for the worst. And Anthony Pettis is a gamer. He's always dangerous. I know this is not going to be an easy fight, and I know he's going to bring it, and I'm prepared for that. And I'm certainly ready to fight fire with fire.
Yeah. And as you said, some of the losses that you've mentioned, you know, he was competitive against Holloway in the first 2 rounds. I think Holloway maybe took over in the third. The Tony Ferguson fight, he dropped him early in the second. The Dustin Poirier fight was a war like nothing else. And he's had big wins in between. So this narrative about Pettis being done, I don't particularly buy. And I think one of his biggest wins, which people discount, is the Michael Chiesa fight. That was a massive win for him.
Yeah. You know what? Chiesa, I'm not going to sit here and talk a bunch of trash. For whatever reason, when I watch him fight, it seems like he doesn't enjoy the psychological effects of combat. I don't know, but like the fight against Pettis, he got submitted by like a triangle armbar. And that's a fight I feel like he had the grappling advantage, but considering he was fighting such a dangerous striker, sometimes it makes guys make weird decisions. But no, I was actually rooting for Pettis pretty heavily in that fight, and it was cool to see him get the win. Then it's funny, I'm fighting Pettis, a few years later, which is really cool. But I mean, yeah, that was a big win over a fight. I thought, if anything, Chiesa would win on the ground. So, I'm not overlooking, Pettis' ground game, certainly, and never. And someone would be stupid to overlook his striking. But I think this is going to be a very difficult fight. But I do feel like I thrive in duress and in firefights. So, again, this is a fight I kind of plan on being a hard fight, and I plan on, like, kind of picking up the pace as the fight goes on.
Yeah. And another aspect of the fight, Anthony Pettis was UFC lightweight champion. He fought for the interim UFC featherweight title, and he's now fighting at welterweight. Having looked at your record earlier, you fought the vast majority of your career at welterweight, and you actually had some fights at middleweight, I believe.
Yeah.
It's clear to see, looking at your body type, you would struggle to make 155, let alone 145. So is the strength and the size, your strength and your size, going to be key in this matchup?
Yeah, I definitely will be slightly bigger. I know, like, I'm an inch taller, and my frame's a bit bigger. And then, I'm 30 years old now. I'm about 3.5 years in on a very consistent strength and conditioning program. And I do feel stronger. Like, even at Fortis, when I first got there, like, just kind of like clinching with the guys and, taking them down and grappling with them was hard, man. It was hard. And coach was like, Morono, you need to get stronger. And then I take coach's advice, like, more serious than anything. So after my first day, or I guess my first week training there, I came back home and I got hooked up with a really good new guy, an ex-rugby pro, purple belt jiu-jitsu, strength and conditioning trainer who's very aware of what I do in fight camps. So he makes sure not to burn me out, but I've been doing very consistent strength and conditioning. And I feel the difference. Like, I'm like 3 years in with the guys at Fortis, and I'm having like much more competitive success, like in the clinch and when we do wrestle and grapple in the grappling. So I know, like, I can see a big difference in my strength increase. And I mean, yeah, that's something I certainly plan on using in the fight. I just see my dog. My dog is in the background playing with the toy. But yeah, I mean, that'll be cool. I expect Pettis to be very game and very strong. I know he's very explosive. But it is interesting that he has fought at 45 and 55 in welterweight. But like the fact that he was able to submit a guy like Chiesa, who himself is a big welterweight, leads me to believe I don't plan on grabbing him and feeling him to be weak. Same thing, I'm planning on him to be very, very strong. So thankfully, if we clinch up and he's not stronger than I think, which is generally the case, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I remember when I fought Kyle Noak, like, he was big and pretty strong, but I expected him to be bigger and stronger. So even though he was pretty formidable when we tied up, I was like, man, this is manageable. I can move him around. I can hit sweeps and stuff. And I feel like psychologically, that's always been a good bit of a trick. That's like a win-win. It's either they're as strong as you expect, which is standard, or they're not as strong as you predicted. And then I'll have that mental advantage. So, I've always enjoyed kind of the psychological games guys can play. A lot of times it works against guys in fights. So again, I always plan on hardship and expect it. And if it's there, great. And if it's not, even better.
Great. And you've mentioned a couple of times the gym that you train at, Fortis MMA. This seems to be a Fortis MMA card almost. We have Jeff Neal as the main event. We have Daniel Pineda, who fights. I know he trains for you. He does train at Fortis. Is that correct? So
Daniel Pineda is the head coach at a gym called 4 Ounce, which is here in Houston, Texas. It's been around forever. It's maybe one of like the oldest teams in Houston. And in the past, I've cross-trained tremendously with him. I don't think there are bigger Daniel Pineda fans than myself. And like, if he ever needs help or if I ever need some help, we'll work together. But like when I'm in a scheduled fight camp, my work is done primarily at Fortis. And then at the end of the week, when I do come home to kind of like run my gym and kind of honestly rest and recover and work on some technical details, then I may move around in town. But yeah, Pineda's actually fighting Cub Swanson tomorrow for the pay-per-view. I'm a big fan of Cub Swanson as well. I think that's a very bad matchup for Cub. Daniel has equally as offensive striking, but I feel he has tremendously better grappling. And Cub has been submitted a few times in his UFC career. And Daniel Pineda, in my opinion, has some of the best grappling for MMA. I mean, look at what he did against Herbert Burns in his last fight, who was a big prospect coming up, and Daniel stopped him dead in his tracks. And Daniel is the kind of guy I feel can make it to the top 10. And I feel he actually has a good chance of winning against a guy like Volkanovski. See, this is where like the matches make fights. I think Holloway would give Pineda a more difficult time than Volkanovski would. So I'd really like to see Daniel work his way up the ranks even higher and even get that golden opportunity one day. But then at Fortis, I was really looking forward to it. On this fight card, we had Matt Schnell versus Tyson Nam, and Schnell is a newer guy to Fortis. We had Ryan Spann versus Misha Serkinov, and like that fight alone was such a good fight. And I know Serkinov pulled out, so Spann's not going to be fighting on this card. And if I'm not mistaken, Tyson Nam suffered a cut in training, so that fight was rebooked into Abu Dhabi early next year. So, but thankfully, my boy Jeff Neal, and he's one of my primary training partners in Fortis, he's actually headlining the card against Wonderboy. And I've been telling everyone in interviews, I am so happy that I'm not Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, because man, Jeff is feeling sharp right now. And I tell Jeff, and now granted, I'm horribly biased because one, he's a teammate, and two, I do a lot of rounds against him, so I know how bad things can go. But man, he's sharp. He's going to be a problem for everybody. Certainly going to be a problem for Wonderboy next weekend.
Well, this is what this was the original point. I probably got a little bit mixed up. You've got a massive fight against Anthony Pettis, and Jeff Neal, as you mentioned, one of your main training partners, has probably got his biggest fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Is it beneficial to have someone in your camp, one of your main training and sparring partners, who's fighting at a similar time to you? I was thinking about this the other day, about in terms of your preparation, in terms of your weight, in terms of maybe the intensity of how you work. Is that a beneficial aspect of this fight for both of you?
Yeah, absolutely. What makes Fortis such a strong team, is naturally our coach, but it's also the work ethic and camaraderie and teamwork that comes along with being on the team. And like, if you're not a team player, you're off the team. Like, there's no questions. It's a very strict and effective method. And yeah, I feel like we're certainly feeding off each other's energy. And even our last, not our last hard session, but like one of our last hard sessions, I must have done 7 or 8 rounds with Jeff. And man, like, half of them were like very technical, kind of getting the movement down and everything. But then the last few were pretty tricky, hard sparring rounds. And, I don't see Wonderboy looking to wrestle with Jeff. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think Pettis is going to try to wrestle with me. So as Jeff and I were training, we were doing a lot of striking, and man, that's a tough style. Honestly, like, I'm a good kickboxer. Pettis is a good kickboxer. Jeff is a phenomenal kickboxer, and Wonderboy has that mystery kickboxing. So we've been really working hard. And yes, I do absolutely feel like it's beneficial not only to like go to battle with one of your brothers on the front line next to you, but to help each other prep for these more specific, higher skill ceiling fights.
Yeah. And just going off topic a little bit, this wasn't something that I had planned, but after starting this and seeing that you're a massive fan, I interview some people who say they don't watch the sport. Seeing that you do, other than your fight on next Saturday and Jeff's fight on Saturday, give me one fight that you're also looking forward to.
I'm gonna give you 3 fights I'm looking forward to. So I got it right here. Marlon Moraes versus Rob Font. Like, I've always been a fan of Marlon Moraes, even back in his, what was it, World Series of Fighting? I forget. I know that moniker has changed a bit, but he was great there. And he's fighting Rob Font. And let me look up Font's record. I watched Rob Font fight somebody back in the day. It wasn't a big fight. I forget who it was now that I'm looking at his record. But man, just the way Font was able to put together his striking with his wrestling, with his grappling, it was such just a great blend of mixed martial arts. I've always been a big fan of Rob Font. And then anytime I'm teaching kickboxing, I use his jab against Ricky Simone as a great example for people to watch, to really utilize a good jab. So like, I'm excited to meet Rob Font, and I'm very excited to watch him fight a very skilled fighter in Marlon Moraes. And I'm glad these guys got booked to the main card. I have every right in the world to hate the guy, but I got respect for him as Chaos Williams. He's fighting that Michel Pereira guy, who is a random wild card fighter himself. I think that fight has, excitement written all over it. So that's another fight just that I'm looking forward to, because I don't know what's going to happen. And, like when Chaos beat me, it was a crazy brawl. So it's like, did the dude get lucky in a crazy brawl? I'm like, I don't know. It sucks. I put myself in that situation and lost. But then he fights my teammate Razak, and I know Razak well. He is good. He's high level good. 10 wins, 10 first round knockouts. Like, you don't get more dangerous than Razak. And Chaos beat Razak, and like fluke or not, I don't know, but he didn't brawl with him. That was a very well thrown right hand that finished the fight. So it's like, damn, maybe this dude is a serious threat. And then naturally the co-main event in Jose Aldo versus Chito Vera. Like, what a great fight. And then of course Jeff and Wonder Boy. So like, I always tell my students, in Houston when I'm teaching, if there's ever a really good UFC card, I'm like, hey guys, make sure to watch the fights this weekend. Especially if I'm teaching jiu-jitsu class, I'm like, you got these two really good grapplers. But this fight card, I've been hyping up for weeks now before I was even on it. And now that I'm on it, of course, everyone in my gym is going to be watching, but it's going to be a lot of fun. But I mean, even the Bilal Muhammad versus Diego Lima fight is a lot of fun. I'm looking at Jimmy Flick versus Cody Durden's another really fun fight. This is a cool fight card. It's a great fight to end the year, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. And they have 15 fights booked. Unfortunately, I know some of the fights are going to drop off. I'm really praying to the MMA gods that my fight's not one of them. But like, even when I took the fight against Rhys Mckee and I took this fight against Anthony Pettis, like psychologically, I plan that there's a 25% chance that the fight won't happen, or I'm going to get an opponent change. So I'm not getting too dead set. So if there is a change in the battle plan, I'm not going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to stay the course and just do everything I can to show up fight night and perform.
Yeah, great. And if you win the fight on next Saturday, that you will have won 5 out of your last 6. You'll then be on a 2-fight winning streak. Where does that put you in the division?
So I was using, and I'm going to butcher his name, Elizu Dolazeski dos Santos. You know what I'm talking about? The Capoeira guy.
Capoeira.
He was on like a 7-fight win streak. I've been in the UFC for 5 years. It is hard to go on a 7-fight win streak. That's why guys like Khabib and Israel Adesanya are so highly touted, because they got they got perfect records. That's freaking hard to do. A win streak alone is hard to do. So, Elizu has this big win streak, and then he gets to fight Li Jingliang to kind of break into the top 15 and, loses the fight and is kind of back down into the average crowd of welterweights. It's hard to break into the top 15. I've put some win streaks together, but weird shit sometimes snaps them. And I was given a very big opportunity against Pettis, who's ranked number 12, something I'm very grateful for. A win over Pettis certainly jumps me several steps ahead in the rankings. And I'm not focusing on any one fight after this fight. I'm very much so focused on the task at hand. But a win over Pettis opens the floodgate for any fight in the division, any fight, which blows my mind. It gets me so extraordinarily motivated and excited. And I'm just excited to see, 1, how the fight with Pettis plays out. 2, I am going to risk my life to win this fight. And then 3, the opportunities that presents itself afterwards. They're endless.
Yeah. And my last couple of questions, and then I'll get you out of here. What happens on the 19th of December in your fight? And if you win, is it the biggest win of your career?
Biggest win by far. Not even really contendable. I mean, I have some other great fights and great wins, but Pettis is high level of the high level. And then what was the first part of the question?
What happens on the 19th of December? Give me a prediction.
You guys are going to see me try to do as much damage within 15 minutes as possible. Hopefully I knock him out. Maybe I crack him and sub him. Maybe I win a dogfight of a decision. I don't know. But doing damage consistently at a fast pace for 15 minutes is my goal. That's what I'm going to try to do.
Yeah, brilliant. And your fight is the first fight on the main card, correct?
Yes, I got on a main card. I've been waiting to get on a main card, so I'm happy to do it.
And where can people find you on social media?
I try to be very consistent, as consistency is key in martial arts. Everything is Alex Morono MMA. Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, all the same, Alex Morono MMA.
Brilliant. Well, we're wishing you the best of luck next Saturday, Alex. Hopefully you can get the big win and really get a real big name on your resume.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, man.
I will just pause that recording.